All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's program, Challenges and Solutions for the Belfast Bay Watershed, with 3 students from Belfast Area High School and 1 from the Cornerspring Middle School. I'm Brenda Harrington, Program Librarian at the Belfast Free Library, and I want to thank you all for joining us. I also want to thank the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition, whom we've been pleased to co-sponsor these evening programs with during the last year, and glad we were able to do so remotely. Before I turn the mic over to Tom King from the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition for updates and to introduce tonight's program, I want to remind everyone to please keep your mics muted. And also that we ask that you put your questions in the chat, and after each presenter tonight, we will ask the questions then. And then also to let you know, the program is being recorded and will be available on the library's YouTube channel at a later date. Okay, Tom, it's your turn.
Thank you, Brenda. And we want to thank the Belfast Free Library for co-hosting with us. I am Tom King, board member of Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition. I would like to make everybody aware of the fact that this is our last program for this year. We will start up again in September, fall. So hope you've enjoyed the year. I think we've had some interesting programs, and I think they've been informative. For the summer, it certainly is important for everybody to check our website, and you can also locate us on Facebook. The latest summer newsletter is on our website, and it has a very detailed information about getting out and exploring the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition this summer. So I hope you can do that. It gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce Dave Thomas. I've worked with Dave. He's been a person who has participated in our Salmon in Schools program, which is now our Fish Friends program. And I've gotten to know Dave over the years. He's from Wisconsin originally, but he's taught high school in New York and Virginia and Wisconsin and here in Maine. And he does a terrific job on engaging students. I think we're really blessed in the Belfast Bay area, or the Belfast High School and the Belfast school system, to have such dedicated teachers as Dave. And I'll turn that over to let Dave really tell you what's going on tonight with his students, because he's working with the students on several projects here that pertain to our watershed. Dave, up to you.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Tom. And I see in the audience, we have another dedicated teacher from the high school. That's Elizabeth Mick, who's taught most of these students as well. But anyway, thanks to Brenda as well and the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition for inviting us. And thanks a lot to the students who are sharing their research that they complete, and it's ongoing as part of the Maine State Science Fair, which they participated in this last year. And so we have 3 speakers, as was mentioned, from the high school, and then 1 speaker from the middle school. We'll start out with Grace Hall, who's going to be sharing her research project at this time. So Grace.
Hi, everyone. Just give me a second while I share my screen. All right, so for my project, I studied the effects of water temperature on zebrafish embryo development. This is just who I am. I'm an 11th grader at the high school. So the United Nations claims that we have 9 years until our world is irreversibly damaged from the effects of climate change. And while extensive research and experiments have been conducted to investigate the effects of climate change on a variety of different subjects, there's been little research done on how changes in water temperature affect the development of fish eggs and the early life stages of these crucial organisms. So this information just makes my lab and its findings significant, because ocean and freshwater temperatures will be impacted differently throughout the world, rising in some areas but falling in others, and the ability for fish embryos to be able to survive and develop and those temperatures is critical to the maintenance of our world's ecosystems. This is just a quote from Paul Watson. He said, "If we wipe out the fish, the oceans are going to die. If the oceans die, we die." So my big question for my project was, at what temperature do zebrafish embryos develop best, and at what temperature is embryo development impacted? So why I chose zebrafish: they're an excellent model organism to use for an experiment of this nature for a variety of reasons. The conditions needed for their development are known, and they're relatively simple and easy to replicate. So it's something I could do in my high school lab. And they grew in about a week, so I could do it on kind of a time crunch. Also, their eggs are see-through, so I could easily see their development of their body systems and like their spine and stuff through a light microscope easily. So for my experiment, I used 3 incubators for and then I divided them into 4 separate groups. So they were incubated at 22 degrees Celsius, 28.5 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Celsius, and 34 degrees Celsius. Their standard incubation temperature is 28.5. And so these different groups were testing how small temperature changes from standard incubation temperature would affect their development. I observed the embryos every day under a microscope for about 5 to 6 days until they reached the pec fin stage, which was defined by protrusion of the mouth. And I logged how many embryos had died, as well as what stages each were in, and I took photos. I kept the embryos at a constant temperature in incubators, and I checked those frequently. And I only ran it once. I would have ideally liked to run it more than once, but I was on a time crunch for the science fair. I did a lot of outside research before I ran the lab to see how their development progresses and what I should look for. And then standard mortality rate among zebrafish embryos is about 1/3, and I took that into account when interpreting the data. And then I obtained my embryos from the University of Maine, their Hitchner Hall facility. So this is a little timeline of the development. There's a lot here, so I won't read it all out, but essentially after 19.5 hours, you can really start to see the spine and the body features of the embryos. You can see their head, their eyes, their spine to a degree. And then from there all the way up to 72 hours, which is the typical stage at which they have protrusion of the mouth, you can continue to see their spine elongate and them form into small fish. So my results, I found that zebrafish embryo development is significantly impacted by small changes in temperature. I found that survival is possible and quite successful from the 22 degrees to 32 degrees Celsius range. And that was supported by a high survival rate among embryos incubated at that temperature. I also found that zebrafish embryo survival is severely compromised at or above 34 degrees Celsius. And that was supported by an extremely low survival rate, so high mortality rate among embryos incubated at that temperature. This is my graph for percent mortality at each temperature. As you can see, the 22 degrees Celsius, they had relatively low mortality, and then 28.5, they had the lowest mortality, which was to be expected. That's their ideal range. 32, mortality did go up, and then at 34, is extremely compromised. I actually only had 4 of my embryos survive at that temperature. This is the number of embryos dead each day. It's kind of a little bit redundant of my last graph, but you can just really see the numbers. 32 and 34, they were the highest pretty much each day. So this is my developmental stages. So this chart shows what day at each temperature, what developmental stage each of the embryos was at. And I found that the development of zebrafish embryos was slowed down at 22 degrees Celsius, so it was stunted a little at the colder condition, even though it did have a higher survival rate. At 34 degrees Celsius, it was slowed down also. And then at 32 degrees Celsius, it was sped up a bit despite that the higher mortality. So it was sped up in development, but they did have a higher mortality rate. So the big concept out of all of this, rising water temperatures as a result of climate change pose a potentially very large threat to our fish populations and the survival of their embryos and eggs. So what about the survivors? I had 4 embryos survive at the 34 degrees Celsius range. So what made these embryos survive over the others? The best explanation behind it is that they possess a genetic mutation, which allowed them to survive the warmer temperatures. It also means that if these individuals reproduce, their offspring are likely to possess the trait and survive higher incubation temperatures. Then this picture's a picture I took of one of my embryos under the microscope. So that's all I have for my presentation. If anyone wants to put anything they would like to ask me in the chat, I'd be more than happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Grace. Actually, if anybody has a question, please just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question. I think that can work as well. We're a small group.
Great. Did you notice any other malformities in the fish that, rather than death, were there, say, broken backbones? Were there other issues that were created by the high temperatures, even though the fish survived?
Yeah, so quite a few at my 34 degrees Celsius and then 22. Their spines were a little, they weren't quite right. They were a little, like, I guess you could say, crooked. Some of them didn't swim as good as others or get around as good as others. Some weren't as active as the ones at 28.5.
And that's, do you think that's probably because of the fact that, when laying down the vertebrae at the higher temperatures, they were not fully developed?
Yeah, it could be, definitely. I think seeing a higher mutation rate is definitely a factor when considering the temperature they were incubated at. You're going to see a little bit of it just from developmental deformities with any organism, but definitely seeing an increased rate of that is likely because of the conditions they were incubated under.
Grace,
So we did have one question come in the chat. I just want to get this out. Somebody asked, please remind us why you chose that particular fish.
Yeah, so I chose zebrafish because they're a widely used organism in labs, in science labs. They actually relate a lot to humans and our development. So they're an interesting creature in that way, but I really picked them because I could obtain them pretty easily. There's a lot of labs around and I can see them. I was able to see them good under the microscope, and they were a fish that I could deal with at my experience level, which was little to nothing.
Thank you.
Grace, I had a question. Could you remind us how many embryos you started with?
Yeah, so I started with a little over 100 embryos. I put about 30 to 35 in each. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it was about 100 embryos.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So there's one more question in the chat, and then I don't know, Dave, if we need to move on, but I'll ask this one more question. Were there any either positive or negative surprises based on your prior research and then your experiment?
I think my experiment went relatively according to what I expected. Probably my biggest surprise was my survival rate at 22 degrees Celsius. I thought it was going to be more compromised than it was.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question, Brenda?
Okay, John.
Grace, this really interesting experiment. if you have survivors, especially the ones in the higher temperatures that you think may have genetic adaptations, would it be possible for your next time you did this to have those reproduce and see if you could continue that genetic trait?
Yeah, I mean, it could be possible to take those fish and then breed them, depending if there is enough of them, like as far as genders, if there's like say a male and a female to mate together that I would guess possess that mutation. Likely if I did breed them and then their offspring could carry on that mutation. Yeah.
So you're only a junior.
Yeah.
You've got another year. Great presentation.
Thank you.
So next up for the next presentation, we have Jonah Lovejoy, who will be presenting his work that he's done with some sensors. So Jonah, take it away.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thomas. Just give me a moment. I'll share my screen. All right, and I'm just going to apologize in advance if I cut out at any times during this presentation. My internet's not the greatest, but. All right, so my presentation for the science fair this year was on targeting local coastal sea rise, mainly in the Belfast Bay. And so a little background before I begin is, so in a few of my high school classes this year, we've really been focusing on monitoring the sea level rise in Belfast, most primarily environmental science and our engineering class. And so I'll just jump into the presentation now. So a little introduction to sea level rise is that the sea has been pretty much consistently rising since 1900, when after the Industrial Revolution, when fossil fuel emissions really started to have an impact on the global temperatures. And so approximately 1/8 of an inch is increasing each year, but this number will only increase as issues are increased. So sea level rise can have an impact on both the economy and coastal ecosystems by wiping out dozens of keystone species, but also by affecting infrastructure, tourism, and real estate. And so the two most contributing factors to sea level rise are thermal expansion and the melting of ice sheets, which are both increased as global temperatures increase. So the engineering goal for my project was to deploy some tidal sensors that accurately record sea level rise in the Belfast Bay and use this data to contribute to more precise research towards solutions specifically geared towards the community. So why is this important? So sea level rise is obviously a global issue, but local monitoring is still important because specific locations could have an array of different situations. Most notably, they could have more or less than the global average sea level rise. They could have variation in land height, and they could be near different ocean currents and be impacted differently by melting ice sheets. And so this image kind of depicts it, but Maine is a hotspot for sea level rise. And a fact that kind of surprised me while conducting research was that Maine has the most extensive coastline in the US due to its island chain systems. So what's already being done? So some ways to monitor local sea level rise are through tidal stations that are set up along the coast. Satellites can monitor really precise measurements across the globe. And then also community organizations such as the Belfast Climate Crisis Committee have been organizing events to bring public awareness to climate issues surrounding sea level rise. This is just a screenshot from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of some of the tidal stations that are set up in Maine. And the closest one is in Bar Harbor, but this is still miles away from the Belfast Bay. So the data could differ in accuracy. So the methods and procedures of my project really began at the beginning of the year when our class initiated a citizen science project that was through the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. And so with our environmental class and engineering class, we participated in setting up these photo stations that community members could go out and take photos of the coastline after and before storm events to see how sea level rise has impacted those. And then so the second part of the project was to design and install tidal sensors to monitor the local sea level in the Belfast Bay. So we began in our class, we began with a prototype design that follows this. So basically the Arduino, we've been working with Arduino. The Arduino will bounce sound waves off the surface of the water. And this measurement will be transmitted by like either Wi-Fi or a low radio wave to like a microcomputer that will be stationed in the harbor master's office. And then this can be accessed through a Google Cloud by anybody. Throughout the year, we've been working on different codes to work the Arduino. This is the transmit code here. It's not the entire code because it'd be really lengthy. And I haven't figured out a way to display that in a better fashion. So this is just a snapshot of our transmit code. And then here is our receive code, basically the same. We've also done renditions on which sensor we would like to choose. We began with just the ultrasonic sensor that came with the Arduino kit on the left, and we've progressed towards a more durable and accurate sensor on the right. We've also worked on displaying the information. We began with a computer serial monitor, which really is just displayed through the computer. We've upgraded to a liquid crystal display in the middle. But then the most recent one that we've upgraded to has been an OLED, which just works a little bit better and displays more cleaner and clearer displays of temperature. So throughout the year, I've conducted and our groups have conducted research to measure the accuracy of the sensors. And so this is just kind of like one test that we did in December. And so basically we just set up the sensor and measured out with like a meter stick the actual measurement, and then recorded the measurements done by the sensor. So the installation of the project will be in the Belfast town dock. And this is just a bird's eye view of where we're positioning it. So at the results, so at the time that I competed in the science fair, we hadn't developed and tested, well, we tested, but we hadn't developed the actual sensors. And the code that I was working on was pretty concrete and only needed a few more additions to perform as planned. But when I presented it, I expected that the prototype would be able to be tested and installed in the near future, and the iterations would be made as needed. But the sensor has been completed, and this is just kind of the final progression of it. It's in this box to keep it protected, and it's installed on the left at the town dock, and it's on the right is a comparison of like one of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administrated tidal sensors. So conclusion. So overall, the project came along rather smoothly due to the help of Dave Sprague, an electrical engineer who's been helping out immensely, along with David Thomas, who has helped out a lot by just organizing the Zoom meetings with them. Just some of the restrictions, however, were like the online collaborating, because it was hard to really grasp how to program in a language that I was unfamiliar with. And this caused things to move slower, and wiring the sensors was very tedious, and you had to do a lot more than expected. But so the end goal is to really adapt on the tidal sensor for my project, rather than just keep it as a stationary one over the dock. My goal is to get a solar powered floater device that can measure not only tide height, but also temperature and humidity and salinity, and so that it can move around more freely in the bay and measure different areas to collect more precise data. And so here's just kind of an image of what my personal project is going to look like. Maybe not exactly this complex and a little bit more basic, but along the same lines. And here's just some of my bibliography and a little bit of the research I've done. So if there's any questions, I would gladly answer them now.
Jonah, that great presentation. The floater, if you create a floater, will your readings have to be done through a satellite uplink?
Through uplink? I believe so. Hold on. I actually, before I move on, I can give you a little taste of what the readings will kind of look like. I accidentally forgot to share this, but here are some of the readings that we've gotten so far.
That seems to be having trouble.
Is my audio still coming through?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. It's just the spreadsheet and the graph didn't load.
Oh, okay. Well, anyways, the data will be transmitted to like a spreadsheet that will display it, and this will be transmitted over like every minute or so. And then that will be automatically transmitted into a graph that can be accessible through a website. And I believe the floater device will function in the same way. There might be like a hurdle that if it like goes out of range or so, but hopefully we don't run into that problem.
And then there was one more question in the chat box, Jonah. Are there any agencies other than your experiment or your project that currently measure sea level rise in the bay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm not really familiar with any agencies. I bet if I did a little bit more research, I'd probably find you. At the moment, I don't know of any major ones that measure sea level rise, but I do believe that adding more research and more data to it will be able to, just adding more data to anything would help out, especially in the increase in sea level rise over the few years.
Okay, I can read this one now, Dave. I was muted
Hey, sorry.
before.
Sorry.
That's good, thank you. Will the floater device give measurements to the public via a link the way the present device does?
Yes, of course. I feel like once I'm able to test it and make sure the data that's coming back is accurate, then I definitely think letting the public see it would be the real end goal, to just kind of like maybe open some eyes or increase support for fighting, I guess, against sea level rise. I think that's it. But thank you all for listening in, and I'll pass it back over to Mr. Thomas, I think.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jonah. So next we have a middle school student presenting some results from a 2-year project they've been working on at the Cornerspring Montessori School. So Judson, would you want to go ahead?
Just 1 second while I share my screen. Hello, I am Judson Thomas from the Cornerspring Montessori School, and at our school we have been doing a project on GMRI, and today I will be predicting the abundance and distribution of crab species along coastal Maine and New Hampshire. So this project was made possible by the Gulf of Maine Research Institute and the Citizen Science Project called Project Untitled Crabs. So this link here takes you to all of the citizen science projects the Gulf of Maine Research Institute is currently doing, and we are the project Intertidal Crabs. If you click there, you can see some of the data that we have collected, or that all the field sites have collected that were contributing to this project. And you can also find other things such as ID cards, and feel free to look at this link in more spare time. So in Penobscot Bay, there are 2 native crab species. One is the rock crab, which has a rather broad shell, and it has 9 to 10 spines on the sides of its carapace on each side. It has, you can tell it's a rock crab by these distinct designs on the top of the carapace and the symmetrical designs where my pointer is, if you can see it. The other native species of crab is called the Jonah Crab. They also have a very broad carapace, but they have more rounded spines. They also have 9 to 10 spines on each side. They also have a more rounded carapace by the top and don't have as distinct a design as the rock crab. There are also 2 invasive species in Penobscot Bay, including the Asian shore crab, which you can tell from its rather boxy appearance and striped legs. The other invasive species is the most common among all crabs here in Penobscot Bay, and it is called the green crab. If you've seen a crab before, you've probably seen a green crab. And they are distinguished by their 5 spines. They always have 5 spines on the sides of their carapace. And don't let the green in their name fool you, because they can come in all different colors, from red, yellow, orange, or green. So in this slide here, these are all actually green crabs, and this elaborates on what I said last, how they are all different colors, not just green. But during my investigation, I had to be able to find out whether a crab is male or female. So to distinguish a male between a female, you look at the triangle, or the pattern, or the triangle on the ventral side of the crab. And if it is a very pointed triangle with and it kind of looks like the Washington Monument, then that can tell you that it is a male crab. And so in box A and in box B, these are both male crabs. However, if it's more circular on the ventral side of the crab, and it's darker, doesn't come to as fine a point at the top, then you can tell that it is a female crab. And in box C and in box D are female crabs for those reasons. So we went out 10 times to Moose Point State Park, which is in Searsport, since September of 2019. We sampled in the low intertidal zone, so we had to go out at low tide to access that zone. And before we went out the first time, we had to find a 100-meter transect down the coast, down Moose Point State Park, which you can see in the picture to the right. That is the transect that we chose. That is what the shore looks like. before every time we went out, we randomly generated 6 numbers and converted those to meters. That is where we would place our 1 meter squared PVC pipe square, which you can see also in this picture. And that is where we'd place them along the transect. We would search for crabs inside of this area, and the crabs we found, we would place in a bucket where they would then be counted, found what species they were, found out if they were male or female, had a hard or soft shell, and if they had a presence or absence of eggs. So in these 10 samplings, we found 141 crabs, all of which were green. So we found no native or Asian shore crabs. The green crabs range from less than 1 millimeter to the largest of 80 millimeters. 88 of these crabs were male, 45 were female, and we were unsure about 8 of the crabs' sex. Out of the 45 female crabs, none of them contained eggs. 128 of the crabs were hard-shelled, while 13 were soft-shelled. So in this slide, this shows the abundance of the different types of crab from Rockingham County, which is down in New Hampshire, all the way up to Hancock, which are the furthest field site was Gilpatrick's Cove, which is on Mount Desert Island. So this is from the farthest south up to the farthest north, which is Hancock. These red bars signify the green crabs, and as you can see here, the green crabs are the most abundant and were prevalent in every field site, every county. And the native crabs are the blue bar, and you can see they're only in Rockingham, Cumberland, Sagadahoc, Knox, and Hancock County, and they are not as abundant as green crabs. And you can see that we have not found any in our search in Waldo County. The golden bars are Asian shore crabs, which are also not as abundant as green crabs, and they are mostly found in the southern part of the counties, and we didn't find any in Knox, Waldo, or Hancock during the study. And all of these counties, there were multiple field sites that people found data on, but these counties include all of the field sites. And thank you for watching, with a special thanks to my teachers, Susan Terrio and Diane Sternberg, and also my classmates at Cornerspring Montessori School for sampling with me, and also the Gulf of Maine Research Institute for making this data available for us to add to, and participating schools for making it possible. And yeah, now I will gladly accept any questions about that.
I actually have a question for you, Judson. Where are the other field study sites in Waldo County?
There's one in Mossman Park.
Okay.
Which is also, yeah, Mossman Park, and yeah.
Searsport, that's in Searsport, right? Yeah.
Searsport, Mossman Park and Searsport. There was one there.
Okay. Cool, thanks.
Hi, Judson. Nicely presented. Could I ask, what was the time frame for your study?
Right. The whole project has been going on from later 2018, and it is actually still going on to today. We actually went out yesterday and did this data collection. But during my graph is from the 2019 to 2020, just before the new year. So
okay. And I was just curious about the non-egg bearing females. You have any theories on that?
Well, maybe it's Because well,
Is it seasonal, do you think? I truly don't know.
oh, we didn't find any, no matter, we went all seasons, winter and spring and summer, and we didn't find any. So I'm not sure what the other field sites found for that, but I know we didn't, no matter what season it was, and under no circumstances we found any female crab or egg-bearing females.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Judson.
Yes, thank you.
Judson, there's another question in the chat. For the 19 crab samples, were crabs more prevalent during certain months and maybe less during the other months?
Yes, during the winter, we found 0 crabs whatsoever from about October to March. And in the other times, like summer, we went in the summer and there was a lot of crabs. And also in the later spring and early fall, we found a lot more crabs.
Judson, as we think about climate change and warming temperatures, what do you think that means for some of the crab populations? I'm really thinking about that Asian, what was the name of the Asian crab?
The Asian shore crab.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about what might happen in terms of the distribution of the Asian shore crab?
Yeah. So the Asian shore crab does not, as the temperatures are growing warmer, they have been getting more abundant. And so we haven't seen them yet, and hopefully not for a long time because they're invasive, but as any invasive species, they will probably become very abundant and at some point infiltrate Moose Point State Park and Penobscot Bay.
Thanks for that.
Judson, great study. I'm interested. I've heard that the green crab is not only invasive, but is a highly competitive to local crabs. And I'm wondering if you had any chance to look at prior population studies to see to what extent you would. I guess I'm wondering whether the native crabs will ever be able to get back, or is this a observation based on out competition, or is it based on temperature change? Any of those things that you think you could follow up on or
Yes.
find more about?
Yeah, so native crabs they like the colder water. And as the temperatures of the water are getting warmer and warmer over the years, the native crabs are trying to go to places where it is not so warm or so cold or so warm. And so that is driving them out. And also green crabs are predators to the native crabs because they are stealing their food and they are stealing all of their habitat, and so the native crabs will have nowhere to go. And so it can be expected to see less and less native crabs and more green crabs as the years go by.
Judson, we have another question in the chat. What are the crabs' predators? Are there any predators that you could identify?
Yes, so there are us. We like to get native crabs, usually Jonah and rock, because green crabs don't have much meat, and nor do Asian shore crabs for lobster bait and even food. So that's us. And I'm sure there are more, but I can't think of any right now, but I'm sure.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, that's a great segue into Chelsea's presentation, which has to do with green crabs, but I'll let Chelsea discuss that. So Chelsea, you ready to go?
Yeah. Hold on. It won't let me- Okay. So my presentation is about the possible use for invasive crabs, the green crab specifically. I just wanted a little bit of like a backstory. I wasn't interested in aquaculture at all. And then my older sister, who studied environmental policy and planning at UMF, she got into this, and she's actually now an oyster farmer, and it kind of has like a partnership with Nordic. And she's gotten super into aquaculture and kind of forced it onto me. And I found it very interesting. And so I signed up for a marine studies class at the high school, and that was the first semester of school. And then we had to pick a problem in our local area, local ecosystem, and I ended up picking the green crabs. So I'm a sophomore at the high school, and this is my presentation. I need to move this 1 second. All right, so what are green crabs? Green crabs are a common species of, they have hard outer shells and are very tough species of crab. They are often found at beaches or in marshes, but stay out of deep waters. Why is this a problem? Because only green crabs came from Europe, none of their native prey came along with them, meaning that there's no species above green crabs in our local food chain. So like Judson was saying, there's an abundance of them, and there's really no way to control the population unless we go out and catch them ourselves. So they've taken over our local ocean habitat and have interfered with local businesses. Connection to local ocean conservation. After interviewing 4 locals who work in the ocean daily, I received a few comments about how green crabs affect them in their job. They're feeding on our mussels and clams and are getting caught in lobster traps, which is impacting our economy and many fishermen's jobs in our community. Who does this affect? So there are primary stakeholders: mussel farmers, oyster farmers, lobstermen, and clam farmers. And those are the fishermen that I interviewed. Those are like their direct fields. And then they harvest these ocean animals as a source of income, but the industry is being affected by green crabs because green crabs are eating their shellfish and seed. And then the secondary stakeholders, the restaurant industry and the direct consumers. Restaurants cannot fulfill their demand without the supply, and consumers do not receive the product they want, or it is more expensive since there are fewer in supply. Where is this issue centered? The East Coastline, so Maine, New Hampshire, those areas specifically, because that's where I've found the most research, but I mean, they're all up and down the coastline. Penobscot Bay, which is where I haven't actually conducted this lab, but that's where I'm going to center this lab. And then market issue and restaurant issue and supply and demand. What makes this a local problem? It is a local problem because it directly impacts fishermen off the coast of Belfast. It also impacts the restaurants in our country since most of them serve seafood, and since that is one of the things Maine is known for. Who did I interview? Since I'm from a coastal town, it is easy to reach many fishermen in the area. I interviewed the following: Bob Winslow, who actually came into my marine studies class and showed us green crabs and talked about them, but he's a lobsterman and a mooring repair specialist. Jet and Lake Lindelof of Jet Set Lobster Company, who are 2 young fishermen, or lobstermen specifically, who are broadening their field this summer, who fish off of Islesboro. And then Chelsea Gaiero, who is my sister. She's an oyster farmer out of the Royal River in Yarmouth. After interviewing Bob Winslow, I decided to conduct a lab to determine if green crabs could be used as lobster bait. Lobster bait has become expensive because there have been restrictions on how much you can catch. And after asking Bob what he does with green crabs if he catches them while he's lobstering, he said he crushes them up and uses them as bait, since there's really not another use for them. They're, like Judson said, there's no way to use them in food unless you like turn it into a seasoning or something, which I don't really think would be that good. So he decided to use them as lobster bait. And that gave me this idea of creating a lab experiment where I compare the effectiveness of green crab as lobster bait alongside other common types of bait. So I have not conducted this lab, which means I don't really have any results yet. I have not had the opportunity to complete it, and I have thought of 2 different ways to run the lab. So my first idea was in a controlled environment, which is like a fish tank or some way of doing that, where all lobsters are starved and then fed the same amount of crab or bait mix for X amount of time. And then 2, reaching out to local lobstermen and dedicating 5 traps to my experiment so I can see if it's successful in the open water. And since I presented this to the science fair judges, I've actually applied for my student lobster license, and I'm planning on having 20 traps. So I think I will dedicate 10 to this experiment and fish from like the end of June to August to get different variations of results, because the water temperature changes and you never know how the data could look from month to month. And then summary of procedure. An open water comparison to different bait traps to determine if invasive green crabs is a feasible option for lobster bait. The bait choices will be pogies, herring, crushed green crabs, pogie and green crabs, herring and green crabs. The lobster traps will go through a rotation of placements until different bait has been at each location. Then these are my references. I wanted to touch a little bit more on this. I chose to have pogies and green crabs and then herring and green crabs because green crabs do not have the oil and like scent that fish do. So I think a combination of the 2 will still attract lobsters without having to use only fish. Since fish is expensive, maybe you could have 1 fish and it will have the like off put of the oils and the scent, so lobsters will go to it without having to use all of your bait. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now.
Hey, Chelsea, I have a question. So would you be thinking of putting these baits inside of the bags, I guess?
Yeah, so I think I would use about 4 green crabs and crush them up and then just put them in the bag. Because usually with pogies are bigger than herring. So pogies, you can do like 2 or 3 fish, and then herring, you do like 4 or 5. So I think 3 to 4 green crabs would be like kind of like an equal amount. I mean, not every fish is the same size, but I would place them in the bait bags just like you would with the regular bait. And then I also thought about using pig hide, but I think it would just be expensive if I brought in another bait. And if I'm not seeing the results I want to see, then maybe I will introduce pig hide.
Chelsea, I have more of a comment than like a question, but I've also worked alongside a lobsterman before, and he also used green crabs as a bait primarily, and he would just string them along the line. And I think this project's actually really interesting because from what I saw, like sometimes, because he wouldn't always use the herring because, like you said, lobstermen are getting hit really hard by this. But he would sometimes just use the crabs. And from what I saw, sometimes the crab baits or crabs with solely crabs actually yielded a lot of lobster catch. So I think this project sounds really awesome.
and I'm really excited for the results. So.
Yeah, Bob hadn't mentioned like how many he would catch, because that's not something he was really experimenting with. He was just using it because he caught them, and you're not really supposed to throw them back in the water. So I think it would be really interesting to log all this data and also note what the depths are, because green crabs usually aren't found in deeper waters. So if lobsters are in deeper waters and there's also crabs there, will lobsters start migrating to the shallower waters to get that? I don't really know if that makes sense, but.
Are you going to do that this summer, Chelsea? Are you planning to do it this summer?
Yeah, once I'm approved for my lobster license and get my traps along with like the rigging of them, because that's pretty time consuming, I will start this investigation.
Are you planning to do it in Belfast Bay?
I think I'll do it off of Islesboro.
Okay.
But just because of territorial zoning, it's kind of hard to know where to set them, and there's a lot fewer lobstermen off of Islesboro.
Chelsea, what are you thinking that you're going to measure? So so what are some of your ideas there?
So I think how many lobsters I catch, how much bait I put in the bag, or like comparison to the depths as well. And then I'm also going to try to track like females, and then ones that are too short that you have to throw back, because I'm kind of curious if it's the ones who are in the developmental stages who need the food, or if it's just like full-size lobsters. But I haven't completely thought out this lab. It's been a lot of like trial and error of ideas.
Yeah, so one thing you may think about is if you were going to measure the bait going out, like what unit you'll use to measure the bait, and then you could weigh it before and after or something like that. But the more thought you can put into what you're going to measure, then you can be more sure that you're going to get the kinds of results that you're looking for to answer your question.
I'm thinking, I don't think I'm going to do it like ounces or pounds, because that's not really how you would do it if you were just lobstering. I think I'll do it by like general size of fish or bait.
Thanks.
And then if anyone has suggestions, I know that's like not really what this is for, but since I haven't completed this experiment, suggestions would definitely be helpful.
I don't know if this is a good suggestion or not, but listening to you, I was struck by the fact that you have a potential vast number of collaborators, co-investigators who are setting their own traps. And if you're successful in this, it might solve some lobstermen's problems about bait costs. So I wonder if you were able to get a group of lobstermen up and down the coast to help you using your bait packets, whether you'd get not precise information, but some sort of anecdotal information about success rates.
Yeah, I think it would be very interesting to compare data from up and down the coastline, maybe like Bar Harbor to Rockland. The only issue with that is how they would catch the bait, because if I wasn't sourcing it, I don't really think anyone else is just going out there and catching green crab. So I think the sourcing of it, unless they caught their own and were going to like reuse it, I just don't see how they would have enough green crabs to use for an entire day to get results. But I think based on what Bob said, it's very easy to catch him. You can just drop like a barrel of, not like a full barrel, but like a trap with some bait in it, just off one of the local docks or off your boat, leave it there for 5 minutes, and you can have up to like 10 or 15 green crabs. So I don't think it's super difficult to catch them. It's just like, will people want to put in the extra time to do that? All right, I think I'll give it back to Mr. Thomas.
All right, Chelsea, thank you very much. And so that concludes, I think, well, the four speakers. So Brenda or Tom, if you want to say anything in closing.
Well, I just want to thank you all. I was very interested in all your presentations and your projects. So congratulations on all your research this year. And I read an article about you in the paper the other day about your science fair successes. So congratulations on that as well. Tom, do you have anything to say? You're muted, Tom. No, he has nothing to say. Well, thank you so much. And we would love to hear more next year when you complete more of your research and experiments.
Good luck with your research and
Yeah.
keep doing it. That's the only way that you're going to find out answers. And sometimes they're not the answers you want, but they're answers. And that's what you're doing it for, is to get an answer. So good luck.
Yeah. Thank you.